Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming your way. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far this story has reached. No more waiting. Let's get into the video.
Ethan Grant's fingers hovered over the glass containment field, watching the glow from the Blade of Origins pulse like a living heart. It was his favorite ritual, arriving early, before the museum opened, when the Heritage Hall of Galactic Warfare was silent, and the stars beyond its reinforced crystal windows cast their scattered light across relics believed to be older than memory. To Ethan, the blade was more than metal. It was the soul of civilization, a weapon wielded by the first defenders of order, passed down through eons. Some even called it divine, others impossible. To Ethan, it was sacred. He adjusted the silver pin on his robe and stepped back, taking one final look before the day began. He had no idea that everything was about to fall apart. 2 exchange students from Earth were visiting that day, part of a diplomatic education initiative meant to foster interspecies respect. Emily Carter, 17, daughter of a military artisan, walked quietly alongside her fellow classmate, Jacob Brooks. As their group entered the central relic chamber, Ethan welcomed them with his usual warmth. "Before you stands the Blade of Origins, forged in the fires of the Prime Forge, predating even the Galactic Compact." His voice echoed off the vast arched ceiling. Emily squinted at the weapon. She took a step closer. There was something off. Her brow furrowed. "The grip is mounted wrong." Ethan blinked. "Pardon?" She pointed at the hilt, her voice calm, curious. "That section right there. It's supposed to rotate." They must have glued it shut for display. The words hit the room like a plasma charge. A long silence followed. Then she added, "I have one just like it, in my closet." The silence shattered. Red lights blinked. Alarms screeched. Emergency barriers dropped with a hiss of magnetized air. Security agents flooded the chamber, forming a circle around the students. One officer shouted, "Contain the artifact zone," while others moved in to shield the blade. Emily stood still, confused, but calm. "What did I say?" Jacob, unfazed, opened his hollow interface and projected a photo. A high school graduation ceremony on Earth. Dozens of teenagers, each holding a sword identical to the museum's most sacred object. Ethan's world began to tilt. Olivia Barnes, head of research, stormed into the room. She froze when she saw the photo. "That's a forgery." Emily shrugged. "You're welcome to scan mine when we get back. They give these to everyone in fleet studies at graduation. My dad forges them in our garage." Another silence. This one wasn't confusion. It was fear. Olivia reached out, trembling, and activated the artifact scan. The chamber's central AI pulsed a moment later. Result: match origin. Earth model. Type: decorative ceremonial blade. Fleet Heritage Series. Confidence: 99.97%. Ethan staggered. Olivia dropped to her knees. "No." Jacob lifted his sleeve and showed a matching shield. "Same collection. They're not sacred weapons. They're souvenirs." Ethan turned to the blade. This relic he had devoted his life to preserving, and saw it for what it was. A replica. A beautifully made, lovingly crafted replica. His faith shattered, but Emily wasn't finished. She stepped forward, placed her hand against the containment field, and whispered as if to the stars beyond the glass, "You're all worshipping something made in my dad's garage." The Unity Dome, capital of the Intergalactic Council, was never silent. Built atop a floating tectonic shell above the planet Heliorus Prime, the dome was designed to echo the chorus of diplomacy across species: flutters of wings, the clicking of exoskeletons, deep harmonic bellows from gas giants in humanoid form. It was a place of ceremony, law, and legacy. But on this day, the echoes were replaced with a single, unified frequency: panic. In the central chamber, Olivia Barnes stood with her eyes downcast. The massive holoscreen above her played the footage on loop. Emily Carter standing beside the Blade of Origins, holding up her own identical sword like a mirror to history itself. The match confirmation pulsed in red above the feed. 99.97% Earth origin. Representatives of over 60 species sat frozen. Some whispered, others shouted. Many stared in blank disbelief. "Blasphemy!" screeched Councillor Dector of the Ashal Combine, slamming two of his bone blades into the table. You expect us to believe that one of our most sacred artifacts, present at the binding of the first code, is a toy. It is not a toy, Olivia said quietly. It is hand-forged, with skill, with honor. But, yes, it is of human origin. A replica, a child's graduation trinket. Ethan Grant stood beside her now, pale but composed. And yet it predates many of your civilization's records. We have confirmed it. The materials, the metallurgy, the magnetic aging, every test says the same thing. Counselor Tazari of the Celerine Synergy leaned forward, her skin flickering in ultraviolet distress. How long have you known? I learned the truth the same moment you did, Ethan replied. And it cost me everything I believed in. A heavy silence followed. Rachel Monroe, Earth's lead ambassador, took the floor. Her presence radiated calm, her tailored Navy uniform pressed with pin-perfect care. She spoke without notes, her voice clear in every language through the Council's auto-translation matrix. You want to know how this happened? How something so precious to your history came from our home? I'll tell you. She touched a panel, and a new hologram emerged. A quiet suburb, a two-car garage, a workbench covered in worn tools and folded cloths. In the center, a human man stood over a glowing forge. This is Joe Carter, Rachel said. Father of Emily, artisan, not a priest, not a warrior, just a man. Images followed. Dozens of blades lined up on racks, shields with ancient markings, family photos, graduation ceremonies. They're not mass-produced, Rachel continued. They're made with care, passed down, part of a tradition that dates back to Earth's first interstellar fleet, long before we joined the Compact. A Zarthan historian jolted upright. The first fleet, but that predates even the lexicon of expansion. Olivia nodded. And that might be your problem. You looked at Earth's modern wars, our politics, our chaos, and assumed we had no history worth preserving. Whispers spread like fire. The mistake wasn't the sword, Rachel said. It was the assumption that humans had nothing to offer. You inherited our forges, our traditions, but you never knew. A Zarelian archivist stood, visibly trembling. You're telling us that half our ancient relics may be replicas? No, said Ethan. I'm saying they may be the originals. Just not in the way you imagined. Not divine, not alien, human. The chamber spiraled into shouts. Some cried heresy. Others demanded Earth's immediate inclusion into the core historical order. A few even begged Olivia for access to Earth's remaining cultural databases, but Rachel raised a hand. You don't need our permission, she said. What you need is a map. She transmitted the location. Maple Grove, North America. Earth, a place where swords were not just remembered, they were reborn. The diplomatic transport lowered through the mid-morning clouds like a silent judgment descending from the heavens. In the small, sunlit suburb of Maple Grove, life was going on as usual. Children riding bikes, sprinklers ticking across fresh-cut lawns, someone barbecuing 3 doors down. That is, until a fleet of alien vessels the size of office buildings began landing on Joe Carter's front lawn. A neighbor across the street, Mr. Delaney, dropped his coffee. On the driveway, hammer in hand, stood Joe Carter, flannel shirt, welding goggles propped on his forehead, and an apron smeared with carbon. Behind him, his garage door was wide open, exposing racks upon racks of what the galaxy now referred to as relics, blades, shields, hammers, molds. Joe looked up at the descending aliens and lifted a hand in casual greeting. Well, he muttered, guess word got out. Among the delegation, Olivia Barnes stepped out first, her shoes crunching softly on the driveway gravel. Her face was a storm of disbelief and reverence. Mr. Carter? Call me Joe, he said, untying his apron. Y'all here for the Heritage Program? A species of floating biocrystalline life forms hovered near the doorway, scanning the walls. Another, the 8-limbed curators of Zorath Prime, stood frozen in reverent silence. This is the original forge, asked Dr. Veltran, High Chronicler of the Council. His voice translator clicked like wind chimes. Joe chuckled. Not quite. Just the latest version. My great-grandfather built the first one out back in a tornado shelter. We've kept the tradition going. They stepped inside. The smell of hot iron, motor oil, and and time hung in the air like incense in a temple. Dust caught the morning sun filtering through the window above the bench. On the far wall, a blueprint labeled Fleet Graduation Set, Legacy Series hung beside family photos. Emily holding her sword with pride. Younger versions of Joe and his father holding hammers. Ethan Grant arrived late, stepping into the garage like a pilgrim entering a lost cathedral. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, "I spent my whole life believing this sword came from gods." Joe nodded. "You weren't wrong. Just picked the wrong gods." From the back of the garage, Gerald Henderson emerged, carrying a large round shield etched with glyphs. Olivia's breath caught. Her eyes welled. She reached for it slowly, reverently. "The runes," she whispered. "We translated these in 1,000 tongues. We thought they were prophetic invocations." Gerald flipped the shield over. On the underside was an engraving. "To Emily, forge well, dream big, love, Dad." The room fell into stunned silence. "This isn't mockery," Olivia said. This is legacy." Joe smiled. "Every family who joined the fleet got one. We made them with care. People think history's all dates and ruins. But really, history's what you pass on. Through your hands." A Zarnathi archivist dropped to her knees. "Then we have misunderstood everything." Jacob Brooks wandered in from the house, holding a mug. "Hey, Mr. Carter, the council folks want to see my armor too." Joe laughed. "Bring it out. Might as well show 'em the works." The aliens watched as teenagers brought out crates of ceremonial gear. Nothing divine, nothing ancient, but everything real. Olivia wiped her face. "Overcome. This is the archive we've been chasing for millennia," she whispered. And it was here, between lawn chairs and lemonade stands. Ethan, stunned, looked at Joe. "Do you realize what this means for the galaxy?" Joe nodded toward his forge. "Means it's time for him to stop remembering history and start making it." Outside, the first group of alien apprentices was already forming. Swords would be made, shields would be cast, and 1,000 alien worlds would learn that legacy doesn't come from temples. It comes from people. It started with a whisper, then a tremor, then a collapse. Within days of the Council's revelation, the entire foundation of galactic history began to buckle. Museums across dozens of star systems closed their relic wings. Priceless artifacts once sealed behind force fields were scanned again and again, each time returning with the same disturbing truth. Earth origin, 98%, 99%, 100%. The sacred dagger of the Halax Wars, a fleet-issue letter opener. The helm of the 8 suns, part of an old mining exosuit from the Terran Belt colonies. Academic conferences descended into chaos. Entire volumes of historical doctrine were recalled. Professors resigned in disgrace. Some alien societies, whose religions were intertwined with the supposed divine artifacts, fell into existential despair. Others responded with awe. But amidst the ashes, something new began to rise. From Earth, the Human Heritage Academy, a modest educational outpost in what was once considered a backwater cultural zone, suddenly became the most sought-after institution in the galaxy. Its waitlist tripled in under 48 hours. Its forge program was flooded with alien applicants, some of whom arrived in person without even knowing human language, only the shape of the sword they had once worshipped. Rachel Monroe stood before a crowd of journalists as dozens of ships descended on Earth's upper atmosphere. "Let the record show," she announced, "that history was never locked in glass cases. It was alive. And now the galaxy understands that the act of creation is history." Back in Maple Grove, Gerald Henderson supervised a group of alien apprentices learning to smelt their first ceremonial blades. Sparks danced across their faces as they clumsily swung hammers, some with claws, others with tentacles, still others through telekinetic precision. Laughter filled the air. "Strike with the memory," Gerald said, "not at it. The blade remembers when you do." One young Venari student, a crystalline being of pure refraction, turned to Joe. "Your people. They never lost their history." Joe shook his head, sweat dripping from his brow. "We just never let anyone else define it for us." The council issued a formal statement. All Earth origin artifacts would be reclassified as active legacy relics. Preservation would no longer be about containment, but participation. The Forge Guild was recognized as a galactic institution. New archives were proposed. Not just libraries, but workshops scattered across the stars, where young minds could rebuild history with their own hands. Meanwhile, the economic fallout was immediate. Entire galactic markets collapsed as auction houses lost billions in value. The planetary exchange had to halt trade on half its cultural asset portfolios. But Earth's humble industries, crafting, metallurgy, heritage forges, experienced a renaissance. Interstellar guilds sent emissaries. Craftspeople from 100 species came to learn what couldn't be replicated by machines. Meaning, Ethan Grant, now a full-time apprentice under Gerald, wrote a journal entry for the new Galactic Historical Register. I once believed the past was something to be studied, preserved, untouched. But here, with iron dust on my skin and heat on my face, I realize the past is something we reignite, not only to remember it, but to forge it again. At the Unity Dome, Olivia Barnes led the founding of the Intergalactic Center for Cyclical Preservation, a program dedicated not just to studying history, but to repeating its values through craftsmanship. During the first session, Olivia placed a worn blade, the original Fleet Legacy sword made for Emily, on a stone table. This blade was never divine, she said to the gathered scholars, but it is sacred because it was passed down from hands that cared, and that is what makes history real. And somewhere in a backyard in Maple Grove, Emily watched alien children crafting their first wooden swords beside human kids. She smiled, not because history was restored, but because now it had a future. The lights dimmed across the Unity Dome's grand auditorium. 100 banners from every known species in the galaxy fluttered above the circular hall. Below them, a single figure stood at the center stage, Emily Carter. Her uniform was simple, fleet gray with a forged metal sash. Nothing ceremonial, nothing divine. Just the mark of a student who had accidentally reshaped galactic history. Behind her, 2 swords rested side by side on a pedestal, the Blade of Origins, long thought to be the most sacred artifact in existence, and her own graduation sword, forged in her father's garage. They were indistinguishable. The audience, composed of thousands of alien delegates, archivists, forge masters, and scholars, waited in reverent silence. Emily stepped up to the pedestal. "I'm not here because I'm special," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the dome. "I'm here because I noticed a loose grip on a sword, because I recognized something made by my family." She turned toward the crowd. "And that's the part you all missed." Murmurs rippled. She continued, "You looked at Earth and saw noise, saw chaos, wars, disunity. You thought history was something we lost, but it wasn't lost. It was forged, over and over, in homes, in garages, in the hands of people who never let memory die, even when the stars forgot them." The Zarnathi chancellor leaned forward, weeping openly. Beside her, a Cyrixian historian offered his ceremonial robes to the Terran delegation in silent apology. Emily placed her sword next to the Blade of Origins. They fit together like twin echoes. The pedestal glowed, not from energy. There was no tech here, but from the overwhelming recognition in the minds of every species watching. The gods had never existed, but the forgers had, and they were human. Later, back on Earth, the forge behind Joe Carter's garage hummed with life. Ethan Grant leaned over his first fully completed blade, sweat on his brow, soot in his hair. He turned to Gerald Henderson, eyes wide with awe. "It's not perfect," Ethan said. "It's yours," Gerald replied. "That's what matters." Nearby, Olivia Barnes scribbled notes into her data slate, preparing the syllabus for the first multi-species cyclical preservation program. Her face bore a peace she hadn't known since the shattering of her research career and the rebirth of her purpose. At the front lawn, Rachel Monroe, now appointed emissary of the Terran Forge, welcomed a delegation of young alien apprentices. They stepped onto the grass with wonder, adjusting to Earth gravity, to the smell of cut grass, to the laughter of children sparring gently with wooden practice swords. A Krellan child tripped and fell. A human boy helped her up. They laughed. Gerald poured lemonade for the parents, placing folding chairs in a circle beneath the old maple tree. "First lesson," he said, gesturing to the kids. "Don't teach them to fight. Teach them to remember why we fight." The forge behind them roared. "Not as a factory, not as a monument, but as a promise, that every blade made from that day on would carry with it the memory of who made it, why it was made, and what it meant to remember not only with mind, but with hands. As the stars rose above Maple Grove and satellites blinked like distant watchers in the sky, a final message echoed through the galactic core. The sword was never holy. It was just never forgotten.